Hey there, everyone. Today I'd like to look at the way that James Joyce portrays the sea and water in Ulysses to see how this helps develop the idea of the chaosmos. Ulysses is a notoriously difficult novel to interpret, to make it through from page to page, but I think it gets significantly easier when you have some thematic and symbolic touchstones to help keep you grounded. And water is a really easy one because from very early on in the novel, water is a theme. And water is something that naturally is going to figure into any novel that centers on Dublin. Because if you look at Dublin, it is situated on the Dublin Bay. So water is, of course, an important geographical point for determining what Dublin is. In addition to that, the River Liffey bisects Dublin. And then throughout you have all these waterways and bridges, you've got the Grand Canal, you've got all these different places which are defined by their relation to water. So throughout the novel, even in terms of locating Bloom or Daedalus geographically, water is a good, helpful thing to keep in mind if you're just trying to keep a lookout for Joyce's details. But what I'd like to do here is look at the actual symbolic significance of water, because one of the wonderful things about Joyce is that he combines this sort of esoteric, theosophical, almost superstitious level of symbolic interpretation of, these really esoteric thinkers. But at the same time, he's a pragmatist, he's a realist. Because Ulysses is, of course, based loosely on the skeleton of Homer's Odyssey. Ulysses being the anglicized version of Odysseus. But in contrast to the Odyssey, Ulysses is worried about an epic steeped in the real, instead of the sort of ideal hero's journey steeped in mythology, the likes of the Odyssey. So in Ulysses, we see normal people doing normal things. And Joyce's writing style can make it very difficult to orient yourself, partially because the way Joyce writes is exactly how one thinks. Constantly random thoughts of death or songs or little menial tasks that one has to do in the day, these just filter in and out of one's conscience. And you just have to live with that. You have to go linearly through all these different thoughts. But within the linear question of the day-to-day life, there of course emerges a larger, more universal aspect of human existence. The reason that Joyce is able to talk about these things and for the novel to be so successful is because they can resonate with people on a level higher than just the particular individual. They can resonate with multiple different people from multiple different backgrounds with multiple different levels of well-readness. And as such, water is a really great way to link the particular with the universal. The particular of each wave, of each individual moment of water moving about, to connect to a larger idea, which is the chaosmos, right? A blend between chaos and the cosmos. It says basically everything it needs to right on the tin. That the cosmos is chaotic, unpredictable, in flux, changing, and most importantly, it is a process. And as such, Joyce's philosophy is very much a form of process philosophy, the likes of Whitehead or Deleuze and Guattari. And it's really interesting to look for water as this symbolic element. And one of the things that is interesting about water is that, water is connected with the feminine. in a particular way. Because just like waves, we are built from the material flux of things which birth us at any one moment. And we're constantly being reborn, in a sense. We wake up each day anew, in a sense, new memories, new perceptions, new tasks to do. And Joyce is going to accentuate this link between femininity and water, or the sea, in a really interesting way. There's a sort of carefree aspect of the sea that remains throughout when, for example, Stephen says, "Look at the sea. What does it care about offenses?" That's right, it's this carefree, everyday thing. It just goes by. It's this flux of things. But it's not quite that simple. Because one of the things that Stephen is struggling with, and one of the things that actually helps understand his struggle, is he is struggling with the death of his mother. And through the imagery of the sea, we're able to understand how exactly to cope with that. Stephen's mother, just like Joyce in real life, asks Stephen on her deathbed for Stephen to convert to Catholicism. And Stephen does not oblige. So Stephen's mother dies with an unrequited wish, which serves as the backbone for a sort of feeling of guilt or sinfulness that follows not only Stephen, but also we see it in Bloom's dialogues and thoughts about sinfulness and about how this figures into the world. But there's a really interesting moment where, in thinking about the water, Stephen, of course, in the first episode, is in the Martello Tower, which is in Sandymount, along the Sandymount Strand. So we're looking out at kind of a shallow part of the Dublin Bay. And you can see out the window, and we get as follows. Wood shadows floated silently by through the morning peace from the stairhead seaward where he gazed. Inshore and further out the mirror of water whitened, spurned by light-shod hurrying feet. White breast of the dim sea, the twining stresses, 2 by 2, a hand plucking the harp strings, merging their twining chords. Wave-white wedded words shimmering on the dim tide. And this passage is one of the most profoundly interesting because it shows Joyce's mastery of the English language. We are building the body of Stephen's dead mother by using the sea as a mirror, right? The mirror of water whitened, for Stephen's feelings of guilt and longing. And it serves to contemplate, just like the sea contemplates itself in a sense, every time waves wash. We've got the mirror of water, which has hurrying feet. It also has white breasts. It also has hands which pluck and merge. It also has words, which is really important. So there's a lot of personification going on here. And the idea of twining is really important because to twine means to wind or spiral around something. So the water takes on this sense of warm embrace, the likes of which Stephen at this moment would be wishing from his mom. Stephen recollects a dream that happens. He says, in a dream, silently, she had come to him, her wasted body within its loose grave clothes, giving off an odor of wax and rosewood. Her breath bent over him with mute, secret words, a faint odor of wetted ashes. So here we get a further explication of the fact that Stephen's mother's body is linked to the sea, right? Her body is wetted. It is come into contact with liquid. It is wet in some way. So the sea represents a digestive force. We get as much just a few lines down when Stephen thinks, "Ghoul, chewer of corpses, no, mother, let me be and let me live." Right? So the water torments him in the same way that Stephen is tormented by his own thoughts. And the sea here has the power over life and over death. It has this sort of digestive ability to eat things, to make them disgusting in a sense. And that disgust is something that is never lost, really, on Joyce. Later in the third episode, we get a moment where Stephen is thinking about the story that's kind of popular in Dublin right now of a man who was drowned and washed up. Joyce writes, "The man that was drowned 9 days ago off Maiden's Rock. They are waiting for him now. The truth, spit it out. I would want to. I would try. I'm not a strong swimmer. Water could soft. When I put my face into it in the basin of Clongowes, can't see. Who's behind me? Out, quickly, quickly. Do you see the tide flowing quickly in on all sides, sheeting the lows of sand quickly, shell cocoa colored? If I had land under my feet, I want his life still to be his, mine to be mine, a drowning man. His human eyes scream to me out of horror of his death. I, with him together down. I could not save her. Waters, bitter death, lost." And this passage is really important because the drowned man serves as a segue to get right back to the thoughts of being lost, of himself being drowned in the thoughts of his dead mother. And there's a sort of sensory deprivation that happens when he goes into these thoughts, just in the way in which one goes into water and you can't see. You lose the mode of the visible and even the audible, and you're forced to rely on senses you might not normally have to rely on. So there's a sort of profound empathy that's reached here between Stephen thinking about the horror of drowning, of the fact that he's not a very good swimmer, that the water in Dublin can get quite cold. And as such, the links between death and water serve not only as a constantly berating thought, but also a way for Stephen to relate to other things. Now, considering that Joyce is a pragmatist, a realist, like I mentioned before, he's concerned with the ins and outs of daily life in all their ugly details. I mean, Ulysses is framed within a fairly sad plot of a man, Leopold Bloom, who knows that his wife is having an affair, or at least can deduce so with reasonable doubt, likely because some of his own personal guilt is baggage here in terms of his relationship with Martha. And as such, Joyce is going to delve on rather insignificant details, but in a way where it paints a universal picture. On page 27, Steve says again, a goal. I am among them, among their battling bodies, in a medley, the joust of life. And this quote is happening when Stephen is looking out at boys playing hockey. And they're just battling bodies one after the other in a medley of life, a joust of life. So there's that combative imagery. But I also think the idea of a medley is really important because this connects to water rather well. Water, too, consists of waves which battle against each other and breathe a collective sigh together. They create a picture together, and they create a medley, right? They have a rhythm, a tempo at which the tide goes in and out, at which waves fall. And Joyce is a master of delivering the imagery of the sea in a way where we can really get the idea of speaking in one voice, as Deleuze and Guattari say. At the very end of the third episode, Proteus, Joyce is telling us a little bit about what it's like to imagine the sea. As Stephen Dedalus walks along the Sandymount Strand, and now he's reclined back on the rocks with his hat over his eyes, and he's chosen, just like he did at the beginning of this episode, to forsake the ineluctable modality of the visible. In other words, to forsake his vision and to rely on hearing. Listen, a four-worded wave speech. Sisu, hers, cease, us. Vehement breaths of waters amid sea snakes, rearing horses, rocks. In cups of rocks it slops, flop, slop, slap, bounded in barrels. And spent its speech ceases. It flows, purling, widely flowing, floating foam pool, flower unfurling. Day by day, night by night, lifted, flooded, and let fall. Lord, they are weary, and whispered too, they sigh. Saint Ambrose heard it, sigh of leaves and waves, awaiting the fullness of their times. Diebus at noctibus inurias patiens ingemiscit. To no end gathered, vainly then released, forth-flowing, wending back, loom of the moon. Weary too in sight of lovers, lavicious men, a naked woman shining in her courts, she draws a toil of waters. And what's so interesting here is water represents the fleeting breaths of forms of life, trying to be heard in an eternal game. The personification here is key for explaining water's relevance to the everyday. Day by day, night by night, the water falls, it rises, it is weary, just like people are, and it whispers in subtle little ways that asks us to pay attention. And that's exactly what Joyce is trying to do in Ulysses. To make us pay attention to the way we use language, and the way we use language to conceptualize and imagine and build a world that we can live in. This is exactly what Stephen does when he uses poetry and art in order to get along in the world. He's a starving artist, and he chooses the potentially perilous path, just like the water does every time it comes in, ready to come back out, or coming out, always to come back in. So it's always forth-flowing and wending back. Just like lovers or lavicious men or naked women, it's raw, it's visceral, and it's here for us to listen to. Now, one of the more cliché instances of water, of course, is the idea of the stream. The stream of consciousness, the stream of life, the stream of thoughts. This is a little bit more colloquially used. Bloom is thinking and says, always passing, the stream of life, which in the stream of life we trace is dearer than them all. Enjoy a bath now, clean trough of water, cool enamel, the gentle tepid stream. This is my body. And what's really interesting there is, of course, this is my body is the beginning of part of Jesus' sayings at the Passover. This is my body, do this in remembrance of me, right? So there's, of course, larger symbolic meaning here that's signaling to us that this is something a bit more universal. This is a sort of universal stream of being with a capital B. And I think it's really interesting to connect Joyce's ideas to the idea of the univocity of being, as it's expressed by Duns Scotus, but also by Deleuze and Guattari. material flows of things, epitomized here with water, mix with the universal qua the stream that is being. And as such, moments are always passing, events are always coming and going, but there's something inviting, of course, about this, right? There's something sort of zen about it. Now, I think it's important to note that while there are these larger symbolic meanings, we can also get some very particular instances of water being expressed in rather strange ways. The sea also has a seductive aspect about it for Joyce. It's curvy, voluptuous, and sensuous. Curves are the subject of Leopold Bloom's thoughts at one point as he ponders a rather sensuous memory of Molly. However, in order to get his mind off of her affair with Blazes Boylan, he resorts to the cream curves of stone that are the sculptures of the museum nearby. These curves here represent the ideal yet inert and lifeless image of beauty and lust, which can be exemplified certainly by the sea. Ultimately, stone is inanimate and, of course, unlikely to requite Bloom's love. In contrast to this inert, ideal seductiveness, the sea has its own unique beauty that can seduce like something alive, flowing like one of the silk petticoats that Bloom considers buying for Molly. The sea actually moves, thus allowing the triumph symbolically of the reality of the chaotic, even messy sensuality of the real and all the risks that accompany it, even the fatality that accompanies that vision. And of course, this talk would be incomplete without one of the more famous instances of sea imagery, which is at the very beginning of this novel, and it's mouthed by Buck Mulligan, the snot green sea, the scrotum tightening sea. So here, the sea is doubly unideal insofar as it's both torrential and chaotic, whilst also being reified as an actual sea, right? The Dublin Bay, the Sandymount Strand, the River Liffey, etc. In the case of the Dublin Bay, for example, it was literally a cesspool for sewage because the Dublin sewer system at this time was not very advanced, and sewage would just be dumped into the Dublin Bay. So while it's easy to ponder all these symbolic meanings, all these universal ideas of the flux of pure being as such, it's always important to circle back and see how Joyce talks about things as they really are. Snot green, scrotum tightening, right? It's disgusting, but it's reality. And that's the sort of honesty you get in Joyce's writing, and in Ulysses especially, that makes it so entertaining and so worth your while. Because you can get all these philosophical ponderings, but mixed in with someone going day to day, hour by hour, step by step, and street by street over the water, seeing the seagulls play around the water and not fall for Bloom throwing a piece of paper at them. So there's a sort of wit about the water that Joyce is able to encapsulate, which I think makes it such an interesting topic of discussion. So I hope this has been of some use in terms of understanding the role of the sea and the idea of the chaosmos in James Joyce's Ulysses. Check out any of my other lectures that I've done on postmodernism, German idealism, gender theory, other literature. Become a channel member for $5 a month and gain access to, among other things, a private philosophy Zoom, which you can tailor to your needs. Maybe you need help with some sort of reading or discussing a philosophical problem. That's it for this lecture, and I'll see you in another one.